What's up, investors? On this week's show of the Note MBA podcast, we talk all about mid-year goals and routines and how pretty much this year has just been off the rails due to a lack of adherence to any kind of routine from most of us here on the show. However, we're still accomplishing goals and things like that, but we talk about how we can be doing so much better, and we talk about so much more on this week's episode of the Note MBA podcast. Check it out right now.
And following away from it, very valuable as we talk about your mid-year goals, is I've also had some time to reflect on the goals that I'd had written down this year. And man, I feel good. I've accomplished a lot of them. But there are so many of them that I am so far away from achieving. And
first, seconds, performing, non-performing? What the f***? Note buyers, when it seems like you're in this business alone, know Chase, Robert, and the rest of their tribe are at it every week. They're bringing updates from their own note businesses as they work to find, fund, and finish deals. Follow along as they share their grassroots education with you, tuition free. If you'd like to know more about what they do and to download the entire back catalog, check out notemba.com. Now, here are your hosts, Chase Thompson and Robert Woods.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Note MBA podcast, your home for note investing on iTunes. I am Chase Thompson, joined today by two of my favorite people, sort of. Specifically, and on this call, joined by Mr. David Glinsky, and then I guess kind of via call-in. Would you say it's kind of like a call-in?
Yeah,
right.
I consider it a call-in.
Mr. Robert Woods, which is fun, which is really, really cool. So we had discussed last week potentially doing a show all around the kind of the mid-year's goal show that we've done historically, which has been a lot of fun. And we've had a lot of we've had a lot of fun with those shows. They've been kind of our most popular shows, as it were. And for good reason. I mean, it's important to kind of do that review, and it's important to course correct, if you're seeing yourself kind of go off base and things like that. And I wanted to also have, Robby's take on where he's at right now, what he's doing with the things that he's working on. But we couldn't, mesh schedules and things. So what we have is we essentially have kind of the intro, as it were, to the show. We'll be bringing you kind of his take, where he's at, his ideas on the goals front and all that kind of stuff. And then we will come back, disseminate, kind of where we would have inserted banter with Mr. Woods, and kind of give our take on where we're at, what's going on with what we're working on, where we're headed, and all of that. Does that sound good, Mr. Glinsky?
Sounds great to me.
Perfect. Well, without further ado, let's hear from Mr. Robert Woods.
alrighty, well, it's August. We are in month 8 of the year. Man, these days are just flying by. And I have not been on the podcast for quite some time now, and it's time to catch everybody up. I believe Chase and David are going to put together a show today going over mid-year goals. We're a month past mid-year, which is great. So you've had time to reflect if you haven't been doing it as consistently as your ideal self would like you to be doing that. So I guess let's kind of dive into my portion of the show today. I just sat down. I've got a nice cup of tea, and we had a closing today on a deal that I'm happy that we exited. We exited profitably, not significantly profitably. We had some big hang-ups with the attorney for the original note buyer, and then we ended up needing to put a new roof on the property at closing, which cost us another $5,500. But that's a deal we'll get into a little bit down the road, probably later in August, if not in September, as I obviously have to get some bills back and cancel some insurance, cancel some utilities, and get the balances settled before we have actual numbers. So I've been gone for a while, like we said, and what have I been doing? I've been up to a lot. I've popped onto a show and talked a little bit about my time in California. The last month, July here, I have essentially been on the road driving around, checking out my assets, all except for a couple trips back to Orlando. One to get some files, and the other one, we'll call it a homesick / road sick / partially self-induced sick, and wanted to sleep in my own bed for a few days. And we've talked about this before in past episodes, the value of getting out and seeing your assets on a regular basis or getting in front of them. And I'd like to call that a routine that I'm getting into, trying to consistently get out and see them. But, one of the things that's unique about it, I've done it before. There's a lot of value in it. What I want to back away from saying, getting into a routine of looking at my properties, I want to talk more about a value of a daily routine and something I've reflected on for myself as it pertains just personally, as well as the business and relationships. And man, the last 3-4 months, really 4 months, April, May, June, and July, I have got to say that I did a horrible job at having any consistent routine. I mean, I'm talking between my diet, my sleep, what I was watching in the sense of amount of television I was consuming, just a healthy routine with meals and a routine of what I was eating. Where I want to parallel that is also, talking about the last 4 months have been ripe with struggles, but at some level, I want to say they're false struggles. I've been sitting here with my ego trying to occasionally assess whether I think, the mistakes or the losses that I've made in the last few months that have added up. Is it due to outside circumstances? Do we want to put some of that blame, so to speak, and spread it out like some butter on toast and just have a little less of it in places you don't want it? And, a lot of it has to come down to the fact I just blew my routine out of the water. And a few years ago when I lived in California, actually a lot of years ago when I lived in California, I was fortunate enough to be exposed to the author Robert Allen, whose first book I had read in college called Multiple Streams of Income. I'd been able to interact with Robert and mentor with him under one of his programs that he had. And, he called it a ritual, your routine, your consistency, and the value that brings to you, just in balancing your personal life, your business life, all aspects. And I'd also recalled seeing a documentary about Deepak Chopra, the spiritual author. And he is just adamant about sticking to this routine that he has. And it's, provided him with the consistency in his life to use as the foundation for success. And, I want to, go through this process with you and kind of share and talk to you about it's very real to occasionally just, I want to say, slip up, or at least it has been for me. And I was coming down the steps from my, my upstairs office before I was getting ready to record this. And I was looking at the book that I'm reading and realizing that in the last probably 3.5 weeks while I've been on the road, I've been reading more because it was becoming much more conscious to me. The fact I drifted so far away from a routine and that it was really negatively affecting me individually and my business. But I was looking and I said, well, man, I haven't been reading a lot of books. And that's another thing highlighting that, last year, this time I was powering through books, trying to read, essentially a book in an eighth, a book in a seventh a week to just kind of keep up with my pace and keep going. And I've fallen off of that. And the other aspect of like falling out of that part of my routine was, what have I been reading? I've been reading a lot of business books during those last 4 months. It was really this last month in July that I started picking up some more books to, realign my thoughts and my internal self-speak and take a look at what was going on. And also, reflecting on my goals, which why I find this conversation about the routine and falling away from it very valuable as we talk about your mid-year goals is I've also had some time to reflect on the goals that I'd had written down this year. And man, I feel good. I've accomplished a lot of them, but there are so many of them that I am so far away from achieving. And some of them I just haven't even begun to process through how I'm going to really dive deep into those goals and achieve them. And then, in the back of my mind, as I think about that and I look at them and I have the self-speak that we all do as we're assessing our progress against this, amazingly fake goal list that you'd made. You got to make it all up. None of that was real until you sat down and thought about it. But you make these lists and you want to hold yourself to it, or at least hold yourself accountable for, should I have done more? Should I have done less? And then I think the bigger part of that is, looking at the items where you go, I should have done more up until this point in the year, saying, well, should you have really have done more? Or should you have not maybe been assessing yourself that as something that's really something you're passionate about internally, and that your why to accomplish that goal is big enough? And I spent some time as I was looking at this goals kind of breakdown I'd done on a separate sheet, really analyzing my progress on the items that I really had almost no progress on. And I put them on a separate sheet, and I spent some time reflecting on what was causing my actions to not be directed towards accomplishing those goals. And uniquely, I was trying to justify the entire time I was looking at those items. And then I really spent some time looking at it, and I just said, wait a second. I was like, you have a reward of X if you'd accomplish this one business goal. And that reward isn't anything that really resonates. It's just, the thing you'd put down. And I don't want to stay on this for too long and kind of focus on just kind of going around and around and around on these goals, because we all get to make them up. And I think that's the one thing I want to re-emphasize about this, the routine. I had a great time the last 4 months. I will say at the same time, there were aspects of business that weren't going as well as they should have been, or progressing at the speed that they've been. But, that's shining a light in the corner of just the business aspect of life and, keeping it very, very balanced, which for me, again, like I said, I didn't have the routine. I wasn't being consistent at the time. And it's unique to see as I've done that assessment of these fake goals, as I said, I got to make up. I realized, wait a second, these are things you really wanted at one point. You still want them. Well, if you'd had your routine and you'd practice it and been involved in your routine for the last 3 months, 4 months, would you have been at a level of progress against those goals that you would have thought had been acceptable? And I spent some time on that, and I really had to admit to myself, I think that had I been diligently working my consistent routine and been on that uptick, I would have progressed at a certain level much further along than I have, and one that at this point in time, reflecting back on it, I'd say, okay, I'm happy with the progress. Maybe you still would say you need to do a little more, or still deficient here, but that the progress potential existed and was very much there at the time you set the goals. Now, it may fall under that saying that you guys hear of, we always overestimate what we can do in a year and underestimate what we can do in 3 to 5 years. So some of those goals may very well be items that are part of that underestimation of your long-term goals, but you just did overestimate what you were capable of doing this year. And don't let that hold you back from actually accomplishing progress towards the goal, as opposed to just writing it off and letting it go. So that's just a little high level on some thinking that I've been doing about my goals so far and progress throughout 2017, and really objectively reviewing the progress and saying, hey, you haven't had a routine and a ritual and the consistency that you need to be succeeding. And, I've found in the last month that taking small steps towards, getting back into the gym and eating healthier food, getting to sleep earlier, making these adjustments back into the routine that I know that I've had when I've been in phases or periods of my life where I've been the most successful. So I hope your mid-year review is going great. We're going to come back with some more content on a couple deals and some other great and fun, exciting news, since we know that our co-host has just recently relocated himself out to Dallas, Texas. And we all wish him and the family the best getting unpacked as promptly as possible and back to business as usual. All right, guys, it's great coming back, and I'll talk to you soon.
Essentially, before we started recording, David, you had said that one of the biggest takeaways from that piece from Robby was that it's okay to muck it all up. It's okay to be walking the path and just step right in it and just realize that, you've made a mistake, mistakes have been made, or things aren't going the way that you had planned, correct?
Absolutely. And so what I meant by that is I read a book called The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F.
It's a good book, currently a bestseller.
It's a really, really good book.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the points he touched on was the feedback loop from hell. Do you recall that?
Yes. So I've heard it in a lot of different form factors, but go ahead and dive in, and then I'll give my 2 cents on it.
So what I was thinking when Robby talked about it's okay to, realize that you're off track and maybe you're not aligned with your goals as much as you should be, I find that sometimes and I've seen friends and family do this, that they psych themselves out. They're like, oh no, I'm not reaching my goals. I'm not on top of my goals. I'm nowhere near my goals. And that pushes them, back 5 steps. And instead of, acknowledging where you are and, your lack of alignment and fixing it, you just kind of get in this loop of, well, I'm not on my goals, so maybe I shouldn't try as hard, or maybe I shouldn't, or maybe I can't do it now. And it just becomes this feedback loop of just like, well, I can't do it. And since you think you can't do it, then you're not doing it. And then the whole cycle just starts over again. And it's pretty vicious, but it reminded me of that like, don't psych yourself out too hard, from what Robby was saying. Because that's just what goals are. It's kind of like a direction. It's not, it doesn't have to be set in stone. Everything's made up, it's what you want to do in your own mind. So it's okay to adjust them from time to time, or maybe something's too hard, bring it down a notch. Or if something's too easy, bring it up 5 notches. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And this idea of the feedback loop is a really fascinating one that comes from, obviously a lot of different places, but my familiarity with it is from people I know in the software engineering space, the computer science space, of this idea of you write code, then you test the code, you run the code, was it successful, was it not successful, and then you go back to step 1 and you write more, or you go to step 2 and you define, better define your desired outcomes. So it's essentially this idea of like rinse and repeat of define your desired outcome, run the test, how did it end up, right? And then go from there and just rinse and repeat this kind of feedback loop, right? And so there's a really important component, I think, in that a lot of people miss, and it's the writing of a test or gauging of the test before running it against what your desired behavior or goal or outcome is going to be. So if you are working towards a weight loss goal and your test, your feedback loop is the scale, let's say, I think we've all probably seen a photo of someone who's like, I started at 160 pounds and I ended at 160 pounds, right? But their body composition is dramatically different. But if their test for the behavior and their test for what their goal was is flawed in such a way that their desired behavior or effect was just a lower number on that scale, that person failed the test. And so there's also a component and a really fascinating look at when you're designing these feedback loops and when you're designing, and this is when, like you were saying, you can compound negativity on negativity, or you can compound positivity on positivity, depending on how that particular test is designed and how it goes about thinking through the process of, is what we're working towards successful? Did this work or did this not work? And in the realm of something like code for for some sort of processy in some sort of program, it's, did it do what I wanted it to do? Did button press, when I clicked this thing, did it do this thing? And then it starts to get a lot more elaborate after that. And obviously we as humans are incredibly elaborate after that, right? So if it's something like a weight loss goal or a business goal, personal, whatever the case is, make sure that whatever your tests you're running against them are appropriate towards where your actual goal is facing, right? And let's say your goal is to do more business. Let's say it's to do more deals. Well, there's a lot of different areas and a lot of different places that you need to be getting your feedback from. And that feedback loop, as it were, the activities you need to be doing are going to be different, because to do those deals, you're going to need capital. And to do those deals, you're going to need deals. And to do those deals, you're going to need infrastructure. And to do those deals, you're going to need boots on the ground and services in place to accomplish those things, whether it be servicing or BPO or title or We Go Looks or whatever the things are, right? So working towards that goal of doing more business is going to have a lot of different faces and a lot of different sides. And just because today you didn't reach another person that can say, give you another deal, but you made it 5 contacts for additional capital and you got introduced to a better servicer than the one you're currently working with and you're onboarded with them or whatever those things are, understand that you're still progressing. And mucking up something or messing something up is a huge component. I mean, what he discusses is just giant wrenches, right? Like in a scenario. And I want to talk more about some of the other aspects of it, but I do agree with you, the feedback looping and all that kind of stuff. I just think it's also very important for people to properly assess the test and what the actual desired behavior and outcome is going to be. Isn't always black and white. Sometimes it is, but if it isn't, make sure that you're not, like you said, holding yourself to some, egregious standard that just is impossible, or that you're not setting yourself up for failure by only looking at the number on the scale.
Exactly. It's I think it comes down to, you have to have a certain level of honesty with yourself and being able to have like the perspective to acknowledge where you are at as far as your goals, and then having the balance of being able to push yourself harder or being able to adjust and adapt to any sort of circumstances that happen.
Yes, I totally agree. But one of the bigger things that he addresses and touches on, I mean, heck, this show is supposed to come out on Wednesday and it's coming out on Friday of this week. So if you're listening to it, I appreciate you for being a diligent listener and looking out for the show. But the reason why is because we were moving. My family, as we've discussed recently, we've finally moved, settled into Plano-ish. Like I told David before we hit play on this, I'm still not used to having to use Google Maps just to find the bathroom. I mean, we don't know where anything is. It's all the places that we're still in the same state, and the grocery stores that we frequented don't exist in this area. I mean, obviously first world problems, I get it, but whole things about our life, even things that you would essentially take for granted on, like, oh yeah, we're still in Texas, so they're bound to have the same stores. Not a thing, right? So we're having to get used to like just everything is new. And that's both great and challenging and fascinating and annoying. And but it just presents itself in such a way that we have to, navigate, which has been really interesting. But he brought up this idea of routines and how he had not been in a routine for 4 or 5 months or something like that. And that he visited his goals list and he really was like, oh man, I haven't achieved these ones. Are these things I even want? And then he sat down, he talked about it. He's like, yeah, these are absolutely things I want to go after. And then he realized that the reason why he hadn't achieved them didn't have anything to do with effort or desire per se, but it was more down to a routine and a set structure that, look, man, if you only want to be in the office 1 hour a day, like straight up, I only want to be working 1 hour a day, you have to understand that there's only so many things that can be done in a 60-minute window, right? Like, period. You can only do so much in a 60-minute window. So it's essentially the same thing. If you have certain things that you want to accomplish, you are going to have to put in the time and work somewhere. And that is just a requirement. Straight up, it's a 100% requirement, right? So if you don't have if you want to roll into the office at 10 and leave at 2, great. Like, I don't have a problem with you. Like, right, like you're going to work your 4 hours. I don't have a problem with that, right? Like, that's your routine. That's your structure of your sitting, whatever. But then you also have to be realistic about how much you can accomplish depending on the goals you have. Now, if the goals you have are like, to spend extended times at the beach or watching, whatever, reruns on TV or whatever, then yeah, you're probably going to reach those goals pretty easily, right? But if they're to do some of the things that I know Robby has on his list, you're going to need a more dedicated schedule. You're going to need a more dedicated routine, and it doesn't matter where you're at. He's been doing a ton of traveling, this, that, the other. But the people he mentioned, the Robert Allens and the Deepak Chopras, their routine doesn't change when they travel. They're legalistic about it. And those are the things that I'm fascinated by. I'm fascinated by the fact that I equally have not had a routine pretty much this entire year. And it's not, I feel like we don't talk enough about, there's this chart. And we've talked about it before on the show. And I'll share a link to it in the show notes. But there's this really great chart. And it basically is a bunch of tiny little dots on a grid. And this grid essentially is 52 by 90. And all of these dots represent every week of your life if you live to be 90 years old. Right?
Oh, that's cool. Mm-hmm.
It's a real slap in the face, depending on how you look at it, right? And I look at this idea of this chart, and I look at a year like this year, which has seen a ton of growth, a ton of really cool things have happened. I've been achieving goals. This is obviously the mid-year's goal episode. I've been achieving goals. I've been missing out on some goals, just like Robby's mentioned, just like I'm sure all of us listening to this have. But I look at that and I stop and I go, man, by not having a routine, by not having a set system and schedule and all of this stuff done, a lot of these weeks for this year specifically haven't necessarily been a waste, but they haven't been full potential time.
So that, you're right. So that's, and I'm sorry to interject, but when you're talking about routine and all the kind of stuff you were saying, what popped in my head was, it sounds like to me routine breeds efficiency. So like if you want to be that guy that goes into the office for only an hour a day, you're going to have to be realistic about, I'm going to need a routine so I can be, X amount efficient so I can get shit done in an hour and then get out of the office. But if you don't have a routine, you're not efficient and you're not going to be able to go there and get stuff done. But yeah, I'm guilty too, man. This whole year, there's been very little routine besides going daily to the flips. And besides that, have you read that book, The Miracle Morning?
Oh yes, absolutely. We've talked about it on the show. We talked about The Miracle Morning, which is good. Right. What is that? That's Hal. Shucks, I can't. Hal Erod, something. I think it's like ERROD or something like that. The Miracle Morning is good. Yeah. It's a great book.
And that talks about like daily morning routines and how important it is to start your day off consistently. To really get like that boost in the mornings, right?
Yeah, I think so. Here's my question though, and this is what I wanted to pose, and I would have loved to have been able to banter with Mr. Woods about this one. But I essentially anybody who's listening that would love to kind of give feedback on this. Something I've been looking at and thinking about and wondering about is we've talked about the importance on this show. Every single leader or thought leader or, whatever successful person talks about it. But this idea of how important it is to write down goals and to have these routines and to have, these kinds of things, right? But I guess my question is there and people in the tech industry talk a lot about this regarding, different apps that become hot, or different investments, or different things like that. But generally speaking, I'm wondering, is there a bit of a survivorship bias, right? So this guy wrote down his goals. He's got a business valued at, 50 million, or he's Elon Musk, or he's Tony Robbins, or he's doing whatever he's doing, right? And he's winning, quote unquote, right? And I don't mean that to say that like you have to have a lot of money to win. I mean anyone that is currently doing it. And they like to point to it being these goals that I've written down and these other things. But I know a lot of people that legitimately, they do the written goal thing. They're really working after it. They're really doing it, and they just don't have that next component, that or something isn't there where just doing that thing, and everyone's listening to, oh, but you got to do the work too. Yeah, of course you do. And you also have to, yeah, of course you get. Yeah, I get all that. But what I see is, so one of my kind of, I would call it a yearly goal, but one of my next goals regarding kind of fitness and health is a particular type of fitness. It's called GST. It's gymnastic strength training. I was in gymnastics for a long time when I was little, and I loved it. And nothing has really worked for me in my adult years when it comes to fitness and working out and health. And so I was like, maybe I'll take a trip back, right? Like I really enjoyed that time, and it's going to be just so hard, right? Because like I'm much heavier than I was then, right? When I was like 12, right? And you're like, 70 pounds, and you know what I mean? Like, and you're way more flexible and all that kind of stuff, right? It was going to be a tremendous amount of work. But one of the issues that a lot of people have with this particular training, this GST, this gymnastic strength training, is that the people that run this course, they've actually done interviews on like the Tim Ferriss show and stuff. He's a great dude. His name is Coach Sumner, Coach Summer. And he used to be like the national team gymnastic coach and all this kind of stuff. And when people jump into the forums on this program that is marketed at like everybody, if you just follow the program, you put in the work, you do what you got to do, all this kind of thing, you're going to find success. You're going to get more flexible, stronger, yada, yada, yada. If you go into the forums and someone's like, yeah, I really don't know if this is the right thing. I don't know if this workout is, or, this, they get blasted with, you're not doing it right. You're not, you're not dedicated enough. You're not whatever. And I'm like, how would you even know that? Right. But like the people they're used to dealing with are high-level athletes, like elite level athletes, national competition athletes. These are these people are traditionally dealing with. They're going to get communicated to in a different way. They're going to need a different level of that type of tough love and whatever. Maybe you get 75 people that say there's a disconnect between this course and this course here, and I'm having trouble progressing. Maybe they're on to something. But it all goes back to feedback loop. It all goes back to this survivorship bias. We set up this program and we designed it in such a way that we've produced elite level athletes, and now we've dumbed it down a little bit for the general populace. But your initial subset they're different people. They're wired differently. And so I get that you might have thought you did this thing this particular way. So I just wonder a little bit sometimes that like, is it the written down goals that got Richard Branson to Virgin and doing all the things that he's done? There's a great story of Jim Carrey, who wrote himself a $10 million check for acting services and put it in his wallet. And then 10 years later, he had it in his wallet, and that was when he signed his deal with for Dumb and Dumber, and it was for $10 million or whatever. I mean, sure, but like, it's a great story, but like, man, how many other people have done that? And it didn't work out. So I was ruminating on this, listening to Robby, talking about routines and talking about goals, and all of that's great. And Robert Allen and all, it's awesome. And I'm sure you're going to find some level of success, right? But is there a level of survivorship bias on that? Is it we see these successful people do this thing, and I want to be like that person. What did they do? I'm going to go do what they did. But we don't ever hear from those people that wrote down all their goals and then didn't do shit, even though they were working for it and being
it's like watching the news, right? So it's you always hear all the bad things that happen in the world, not the good things. But it doesn't mean that there aren't good things happening in the world, right?
Except in this case, it's the opposite. All you hear about is these winners, these unicorns in the tech universe that are doing all the things they're doing. But there's this graveyard of people. So I was asking some people before we hit record about this idea and about this concept. Mm-hmm. And one of them said that, particularly she didn't feel that a goal, if it's your big, major, number one goal for the year, that you probably didn't need to write that down. Like, that's your focus, right? Like, that's, and, I said, I don't disagree with that, I said, but, as part of a visual learning opportunity, I said, what if I try to hit this trash can from across the room with a marker? So I picked up a marker and I walked near the trash can, and then I closed my eyes and I walked away from the trash can, and I kind of stumbled about, and I was like, so I'm working through my year and stuff's gotten harder, and I don't, I'm losing, focus and traction, but I know I've got my goal. It's right over there. It's hitting that trash can with this marker. My eyes are closed this whole time, right? And then I'm like, so now I'm going to try to hit that goal. And I threw the marker, and of course I missed, like royally. Because I didn't have it written down. I didn't have my eyes open. How are you going to hit the target you can't see, even if it's the big one? And so,
it's just like Earl Nightingale says, right? A ship with a planned destination is going to get there 99% of the time. But a ship that just goes out trying to get to any destination, like that, they're probably just going to end up on some derelict beach or something like that.
Yeah. And so just by thinking about it, right? Like, and reaffirming to myself that, like, I really do need to be reviewing these things. I really do need to be looking at them. Even if it's my big number one stuff, if I'm walking around aimlessly, no routine, no system, no schedule, my eyes are closed to the target, how am I ever going to hit these things? And I feel like listening to him talk about, some of the mistakes that were made and getting repurposed, refocused, and getting back on track was essentially, that's been my biggest problem this year. And I look at that giant chart of all of these dots and I go, if you've got all these dots and you have like a coloring system, and every week that is just like, I'm banging it out this week is a green. And every week that's like that was kind of a good week is a yellow. And then the dead weeks, the ones that are just like, I didn't do shit that week, those are red weeks, right? If you're looking at that, I feel like a lot of 2017 for me has been yellow. Like, it hasn't been not pushing, to use, football metaphors, right? Because football's right around the corner. We're moving the ball down the field, but it's like a yard at a time. And then we're punting it off to like have to go back and like recoup and then like try to get it back and try to keep moving. We're never making it to the red zone, right? We're never getting the touchdown. The progression has been so stalled because, again, I can't even see the end zone because my eyes are closed to it. And I don't have a routine in place. I don't have plays ready to call because nobody's got a playbook, right? Like, to just completely immerse myself in that analogy. But in general, I feel like that's what 2017 has been, and for good reason. We're growing a ton of stuff on the Node MBA side. We've got some really amazing stuff coming out in the next few months for everybody that I'm stoked for you guys to see. We had this big move for my family. We brought you into the show. Robby was producing a movie in Northern California and like a backwoods thing that like I can't wait for people to hear about and see. Like, it isn't that this year has been a waste. It's just, it's sometimes hard to properly assess what you could have done had you really been clicking on all cylinders, had you really been walking the walk. And that's tough.
Right. And I think that like also falls into partially us just being, and a lot of people just being entrepreneurs that will always have that unsatisfaction with anything that they do, regardless if they get 1 million things done in a day or a week or a year or 2 things done in a day. You know what I mean? So it's always going to be that push that because we want more, we want to do more, we know we can do more. So it's that weird balance again. It all comes back to the balance of, respecting and knowing that you did a lot and that you're getting stuff done, and but also knowing that you could always do more, right?
Yeah, and it's hard, right? Like it's hard to, and a lot of us are way over, critical, right? Self-critical. Every failure that we have is the worst failure in humanity, and every victory we have is just another stepping stone towards a greater one, right? But then you see somebody that does something exactly like you did, and you're like, damn, they just closed 10 deals, and you're like, dude, I did 10 this year. Like, why am I? It's hard not to be overly self-critical. And I think that's what I've been combating most this year is the same stuff he's talking about. I haven't had the routine. I've had the goals written down, but I haven't been reviewing as much as I should. And I've actually hit a lot of them, but not enough of them. And even not enough of the important ones. And it's getting refocused in a time in my life when like S is hitting the F, like in a lot of different ways, right? But it's not an excuse.
I'm glad to hear, though, that I'm not the only one that hasn't been reviewing their goals as much as they should have, because I lacked on that one.
I feel like 2017 has just been the old-timey black and white runaway train, right, type scenario.
Yeah.
It has just been a throw more coal into the engine room, right, and just like hope things turn out okay, even though we're going like max speed. There's obstacles and debris on the tracks. We've already blown past a bunch of different stations. Like it's been an out of control locomotive situation, and reeling it back in is going to take a Herculean effort, I think, in the short term. In the long term, obviously it'll happen. But really stopping, breathing, looking at the goals, reaffirming the ones that are actually worth going after, getting the routine back in place, getting the schedule back in place, making sure your systems are where they need to be and they're optimized and they're working not just efficiently, but effectively, because efficiently doing a shit job is a terrible idea. You want to be doing the effective things, not just the efficient things. And that stuff is having that, almost that metronome, right, to keep pace and time with your day and your week and your month and your year is, I'm beginning to understand, way more valuable than I initially thought. So it's almost like the title of this show, this realization, this whole thing for me could be like 2017, the year of haphazardness. We're just firing guns, hoping we hit a target, right? And not ourselves. Like shooting yourself in the foot all the time because you're not focused on where the bullet's going, right, on the target, right? And that to me is what it's really like. That's what it is epitomized, and it's due to a ton of business growth and just not maintaining that focus. So I don't know where everyone else is at, right, in their business. I love doing these shows because we always get a ton of emails from people that let us know kind of what their goals are and where they're at and all those kinds of things. We love those emails. I'd love for everybody to kind of send them in and let us know how your 2017's been, you've been crushing it because you were doing the things you were supposed to be doing, right? Actually focusing, actually having a schedule, actually having a routine. Congratulations, big jerks. That you're where you are, right? No, right. We want everyone to be successful, right? But we would love to hear from you guys on your thoughts on this topic and this idea and the notion of how important those things play a role and how quickly it can seem to, kind of go off the rails and reeling that back in. If you guys have any suggestions on books or TED Talks or anything like that, obviously feel free to send those over as you normally do.
And side note, we completely slacked and kind of dropped the ball on getting the giveaway for the feedback contest.
So we didn't slack. I actually have a name here for you. I'll bring it up here. I got it all ready for you. Let me bring it all up here. Hold on. Gerald Miller. Gerald Miller is the winner. So essentially what I did was I took everybody's correspondence. Mm-hmm. I literally, because there's probably a better way, but I didn't have a better way, so I just did what I thought was going to be the most efficient, which turned out to be took a long time. But essentially, I just wrote all of the names down on a piece of paper, and then I just, ripped them all up, balled them all up, threw them in a hat, pulled them all out. It was way dumb. I should not have done that. I should have just put them all into some sort of online, thing. But anyway, we did it. Gerald Miller, or Gerard maybe is how you'd pronounce it. But Mr. Miller, you are the winner. I will get your information from you regarding that, courtesy and care of Mr. David Galinsky.
Congratulations. Yeah. Happy to hear it.
Yeah, he actually is I hope he's pumped about it. I'm not too sure. He said he's enjoying the show. It's really good. It's good emails. Good emails back and forth with him. But yeah, I'm
going to imagine that he is pumped.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he entered the contest. I mean, he literally did. So I don't know what to tell you about it, but so I'm pumped about it. But that is the name. We did not renege. We have it recorded. Mr. Miller, it is yours now, for posterity's sake, for anybody who's listening to these shows now 2 years later and wants to know who won. So there you go. Either way, when it comes to the mid-year goals, it's great to kind of sit down and reassess. Almost everyone I talked to before recording this show had essentially said 2017 had gotten away from them. So I don't know if it's just been the year or what, but very few people. I mean, I would say of the 10 that I talked to before recording the show, ahead of the topic, ahead of this this bit, only 2 of them had, so 20% had been on track, done what they were going to do, and they were moving forward essentially. Everybody else, it seemed like 2017 had really gotten away from them. But, I think the thesis for this show is just if you're someone who's been just jamming along, I want to hear about it. I want to hear your wins. I want to hear your successes. Send us an email, ask@nonba.com. I want to hear about it. And
tell us why you think
you're making it.
What you think has helped you so far this year to stay on track with those goals if you have been killing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're off track, man, listen, join the club. We've got T-shirts and we've got orange slices and Capri Suns, in the cooler in the back. And, let's sit down and talk about it. Hi, my name is Chase, and I have struggles maintaining a routine,
I'll pull the hippie card out, let down my hair. I know people can't see it because we're on a podcast, but it's okay, man. Just go with the flow.
Just go with the flow, man. It's all good, bro.
It's all good, bro.
Either way, I appreciate everybody for checking out this week's show. I would love to hear about your goals, how they're tooling about and making your way throughout the year. If you are someone who's had 2017's just been a crush it year, or if you've had a little bit of the off the rails opportunities, let us know about it. Send us an email. We'd love to hear about it and possibly talk about it on next week's show. Like Robby mentioned in his recordings, we've got a ton of deal talk coming up in the next few weeks. We've got videos that will be released on YouTube, in the Facebook page, and potentially here on the audio, depending on how they translate over. So we've got a ton of stuff that's coming out. Anyway, guys, if you have any questions, check out the show notes over at nonba.com. If this is your first time here, head over to iTunes, give us a rating, give us a review, and of course, subscribe. And as always, be sure to tell 5 other people you know this week about the No NBA podcast.
Have a happy Friday, everybody.